Happy midday 30th of July to you and welcome to Reset 2020. This is our 10th live show and it's great to have you here with us today, or you might be watching this back as a recording. Lovely to meet you. My name is Julia Keedy. I am the founder and the CEO of the X Factor Collective community. And here with me today, I'd like to introduce your host today, Governance Specialist Jodie Wilmar, who is a foundation member of the X Factor Collective community. And Jodie, you may know her from her podcast series, The Insightful Director. Welcome, Jodie.
Thank you, Julia. Great to be here.
Great to have you here. I'd like to start off today by acknowledging the Gamilaroi people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we are recording here today. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us here today. Today's topic, financial considerations in the new normal, is part 2 of 4 live shows with a focus on organisation reshaping. Today's program is part of Reset 2020 research study and live programming, designed to help extend support and advice to as many organisations as possible during this most unusual time. Reset 2020 sits within our programming area at the X Factor Collective, and the Reset 2020 live shows are made possible and also free thanks to our partnership with Equity Trustees. If this is your first experience with Reset 2020 and the X Factor Collective, welcome. It's lovely to meet you. The X Factor Collective is a community where social change makers access support and advice from a trusted and experienced community of providers. Our mission is to improve wellbeing and reduce burnout by enabling change to happen in a more collaborative way. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes. We are using Zoom's platform today. In the chat box shortly, you'll see some phone links. So if your web link drops out, please feel free to jump back in via the phone. And there's some phone links also in your email confirmation for the show. Today, we will be hearing from our speakers first and then having time to answer your questions. The way that we manage questions on the live show is using the Q&A box there on the bottom of your screen. So if you click on the Q&A box and lodge your questions, you can lodge them with your name or you can lodge them anonymously. We are recording today's sessions and all recordings are made back available on the Reset 2020 Hub. I'll now leave you in Jodie's very capable hands and see you later in the show.
Thank you so much, Julia, for that very warm welcome, and welcome to everyone who's joining us today for Reset 2020. Today is our 10th show and the focus is organisational reshaping, and we've got some fabulous guests who are going to join us in just a moment. I'd like to give you an overview of who's joining us today, and our focus is really on how organisations are reshaping and ensuring that they can focus on financial management in these very difficult times. So joining us today, we have Brenton, who is a specialist member of the X Factor Collective, and he has an extensive background in working for not-for-profit organisations and helping them with finance and accounting issues. He's also a CPA for his sins, and he works as a self-employed consultant for not-for-profits, charities and social enterprises. He operates Australia-wide, and his experience is very varied, from startup work to governance, accounting, finance and not-for-profit technical and compliance matters. So welcome to the program.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. I'd also like to give a warm welcome to our case study today, Leanne Raven, who's the CEO, and Bruce Rosengarten, who's the chair of Crohn's and Colitis Australia, or CCA. And they're a national not-for-profit organisation who play a leading role in driving change to support over 85,000 Australians who are living with Crohn's disease and ulceration colitis, collectively known as inflammatory bowel disease. And we'll be hearing from them in a few moments about the really transformational work that they've done about reshaping their organisation as COVID-19 impacts have unfolded. And they'll be talking about the role between the board and the chair in particular, and also the organisation's ability to still deliver on its services to members and the importance of leadership. So we're really excited that you're here today. Thank you again for joining us. We'd like to kick off with Brenton. And Brenton, it's a worrying time for a lot of people in the not-for-profit world. And I know the work that you do really helps people focus on financial sustainability and solvency. And in a few minutes, I'll invite you to share some examples of how organisations are redesigning their revenues and their models to respond to this uncertainty. And I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Jodie. Thank you. So I'll just get you to bring up some slides just while we're talking here. Great to be part of the show today. And what I want to do just really for the first 10 minutes or so is just introduce 4 key concepts that we're going to be talking about through the presentation today, through the show today. We'll be able to unpack them in a bit more detail as we go through and share some examples, etc. So just really to introduce them, but also to look at them through the lens, of course, of the current situation that all organisations are in, which is really quite unique. So they're all very important aspects to financial management, to the finances for an organisation. The first one is budgeting and forecasting, and we can think about this very much in the context of the year that we've just entered, of course, but also looking forward at least to the next financial year, 2021-22, and who knows, even a bit longer than that. I think the current context is certainly asking organisations to consider some different approaches to budgeting and forecasting. So we might think about things even just in terms of the timing. We know that the federal government, for instance, has delayed the federal budget to October this year, just simply because it's too difficult to actually budget. We may think more about the idea of a deficit budget in the current context, so the idea of drawing down on some of our existing funding, etc. Budgeting timeframes come into focus as well. So, of course, most organisations are used to just preparing an annual budget, and it's quite common. At the moment, we might think about a 6-monthly budget, and whether that is more relevant, or even kind of a rolling 3-monthly budget at the moment, just due to uncertainty. I think it's definitely a time at the moment where we may want to rely a little bit more on forecasting than budgeting. The difference between those two, budgeting is generally an exercise commonly done annually where you lock in a set of figures predicting or anticipating the year ahead. Once those figures are locked in, they don't change. Forecasting, on the other hand, is very much about constantly changing your figures, and through this period it may be much more of a task of really forecasting in short stints the path forward, etc., and constantly changing that sort of information and just relying a bit more heavily. I will also just contrast profit and loss forecasting against cash flow. So they're two different things. They're very much linked to each other though, and both of them are certainly very important in the current context. So most budgeting is done in a P&L type format, where the cash flow implications flow out of that, and we may be interested a bit more in forecasting both of those areas. Sustainability, Jodie, if you just move the slides along. Sustainability is the second little concept I just want to touch on this morning and really introduce. Sustainability is all about long-term survival for an organisation, or survival for as long as that organisation wants to be in existence for. And we can think of financial sustainability as a component of overall sustainability. So, important question that all organisations and boards and CEOs have to face on a regular basis is, do we meet current day needs or do we save for tomorrow? And how do we kind of answer that question? A lot of the accumulated funds, if you like, of an organisation that it's built up we may think about that kind of money as saving for a rainy day. And certainly it's very pertinent to ask the question at the moment, you know, is it in a sense going to get any wetter than it is right now? You know, is now a rainy day type situation? So for certain organisations, it may be a time that you really do want to think about drawing down on some of those accumulated funds, etc., and spending money in a different way. Under sustainability, we can think about things such as setting some targets for our level of accumulated funds. So rather than just letting them sort of grow year by year by year, there is a way of bringing some science into that space and just setting some targets. And we can also think in this area just about creating some reserves. So a lot of organisations, for instance, will set themselves a target of maintaining, say, 6 months of operating reserves. So if all of your funding dried up immediately, what level of funds would you need to continue operating, say, for 6 months or 12 months, and then you can set aside that sort of money. So all of those sort of questions are very pertinent at the moment.
And Brenton, I have a quick question before we jump to the next slide.
Yeah.
What role does the finance, audit and risk subcommittees play in answering some of these questions, particularly about, is it going to get any wetter? You know, is now a rainy day?
Yeah, well, that sort of committee, I guess their role is to generally look in more detail at, you know, finance or risk-related issues and then provide advice back up to the board. So certainly, if you're an organisation that has that sort of committee, very much these issues are the sorts of things that that group should be talking about at the moment. You know, certainly a lot of risk in and of itself is attached to finances in one way or the other. So that sort of committee can certainly drive this sort of discussion and, you know, be filtering suggestions and information back up to the board most definitely.
Thank you.
All right, the third little topic we just want to introduce is this idea of solvency. So by definition, solvency is simply the ability to pay debts as and when they fall due. And the reason why solvency is certainly important for any not-for-profit organisation is that if you're serving on a board of a not-for-profit, it's an area where you can get into some legal difficulty if you allow an organisation to continue trading when it's in an insolvent position. So it's important, therefore, to understand this definition. Now, as part of the COVID support measures, we've seen information put out by ASIC in relation to companies limited by guarantee, and also the ACNC in relation to charities. Just saying there's a little bit more leniency in this area at the moment. So if you're in charge of an organisation and you drift a little bit into an insolvent trading situation, as long as it's short term, as long as you've got a kind of a clear pathway out, there's a little bit more leniency in terms of the governance standard in this area, just with the COVID situation that's happening. Something that's very key to solvency and the solvency question is cash flow. So the idea of cash flow forecasting, knowing what cash reserves you have, etc., planning in that area is very important. And it's largely a balance sheet question because essentially to answer the question of are we solvent at any point in time, you need to kind of understand your balance sheet. So what are your current short-term assets versus your current short-term liabilities? What are your fixed assets? And there have been some examples which you might get a chance to touch on a bit later of organisations that have got themselves into some difficulty just really because of this asset mix. So your assets may be tied up in property, etc. So important concept just to understand and be mindful of, particularly at the moment.
And Brenton, just on that point, I'm aware of the changes through the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, ASIC, about solvency. I guess at this time of year, lots of organisations are are, you know, they've wound up the end of the financial year. They've hopefully got their budget approved for this financial year, but they're also starting to get organised for their audits, their independent audits. Do you think there's going to be sort of a bit more scrutiny on this particular area of solvency?
Yeah, I think so. I think with an auditor's hat on, you're very much interested in what's called the going concern concept, which is all about ensuring that you know, the finances of the organisation are telling a particular story around the future viability of the organisation, that, you know, it's got enough reserves to continue operating, etc. And certainly there's a requirement on auditors to be looking at that issue and flagging that as part of financial statements if that's a concern. So yeah, very much so. It definitely comes into focus around in the financial year time, and with what auditors you know, are asked to do as part of their role. All right, and just the final little concept we want to just put on the table for discussion is just this idea of revenue models. And I guess this is very much tied in with an organisation thinking about its future, thinking about how it's going to fund its activities, etc. Are there any areas that are particularly in question at the moment because of the current situation? So if you think about the potential sources of revenue for a not-for-profit organisation, they are actually many and varied. And if you, you know, just doing a kind of a cursory list of all of the different sources of revenue, from grants to passive income, to sponsorship, to social enterprise, to fundraising, there's a lot of different avenues through which an organisation can fund itself. Revenue modelling is really just about looking at the mix of those components and then how they feed into the organisation's activities and fund the organisation's activities, and understanding, you know, what percentages of revenue are coming from what places. That enables then the organisation to just think about the risk of those different sources, particularly at the moment. So, and that is really a case-by-case basis. So you may be part of an organisation that has grant funding that's actually quite secure, as opposed to another organisation that may be reliant more on donations and fundraising, or maybe running social enterprise activities that are really under question at the moment in the current situation. So working this space enables an organisation to think about its future, to think about possibly changing its revenue mix, to mitigate some of the risk that might be present in this area. So if all of your funding's coming from a particular source, so you might want to spread the risk and diversify a bit. That's what this area is all about. So obviously it's very, very important at the moment. And I will just kind of wrap up this little segment with the thought that sometimes not taking a risk can be the biggest risk of all. So that's what this this area is feeding into.
I love that, Brenton. Thank you. That's a great way to sort of wrap up this part. I often like to say to boards, what's the risk of us not doing this? Yeah, good. Fantastic. Thank you so much. And we'd love to hear from you here in the audience today with your questions in the Q&A section. And Brenton will be available to answer those questions, joining us in just a moment. So we'd also like to launch a live poll, and we'd love to hear from you here in the audience about your current challenge, and we'll share the results at the end of the show. And so Julia's just putting that there on the screen. So this is about financial management. What's your biggest financial challenges right now? So we've got a number of choices there. And if you'd like to vote, you're welcome to do that, and just click on make your choice there. And so we've got lots of different options there that a lot of people are feeling different types of things at the moment. Some people are feeling worried about declining revenue, and this is anonymous as well, by the way, so just feel free, you know, no one will know who you are. And if you can't see the live poll, it's just due to the platform that you might be on. So we'll give people a few minutes to just a few seconds rather, to have a look at that, and we've got lots of people responding there. Thank you. And number of people saying that they don't know how to diversify their revenue models. So maybe that's something that we could cover later on in our questions. So some people are feeling concerned that their board can't make decisions. So thank you. Keep those responses coming in the live poll. That'd be great. And if you've just joined us, my name's Jodie Wilmer, and I'm a specialist from the X Factor Collective. And I'm joined today by Brenton Cox, who just gave us a great overview on the financial management and viability issues. And I'm joined as well today by our case studies, and who I'd like to welcome now to the program, Leanne Raven and Bruce Rosengarten, who are from the Crohn's and Colitis Australia. And we're going to start off with Bruce as the chair of the board to give us a bit of an overview on some of the challenges that Crohn's and Colitis Australia have faced and how they are adapting and reshaping in this current time. So welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Jodie, and good afternoon, everybody. I would have loved to vote on your poll, but I'm locked out. So, because like every other not-for-profit, we have our challenges, and we're a small not-for-profit, really. We have just over half a dozen full-time, mixed part-time employees, and because we're probably very medically orientated, our cohort, including myself, have autoimmune disease. So we were all tracking the risks coming with COVID in both a medical way and thinking financially. And quite early, Leanne and I started talking about when do we actually move to at-home working. And we were able to do that very quickly and very easily, because over the last 18 months, Leanne and the team had been transitioning our whole IT infrastructure, which meant in one day, basically, they moved from the office to working from home with great success. And that was the first most important thing we had to do, was secure the health and safety of our team and ensure they could both complete their jobs, but also be fulfilled in doing them, and set up a small community amongst them, which Leanne and her leadership did very successfully and very quickly. The second thing we needed to address was coming back to exactly what Brenton's been talking about, was our financial sustainability. What would our solvency look like? What would our revenue implications be going forward? You know, we were quite, I would call, a tactile organisation, where our services are provided in what was a very physical environment. So together with Leanne and the chair of our Finance and Audit Review Committee, we decided very quickly we needed to project new cash flows, have a strong look at our balance sheet. You know, we had been fortunate that we had spent quite a bit of time building strong cash reserves from 6 to 9 months. So we weren't thinking we're going to be an immediate concern, but we needed to know potentially what the next 12 months look like. And together, we asked Leanne and our part-time CFO to form a few different scenarios, and we would have an urgent meeting of the Finance Audit Review Committee to spend a mere focus on the future solvency and cash flow position for the organisation, which we did. Leanne and Renee, who's our part-time CFO, who's a very talented person, which we're very grateful for, presented us 3 different scenarios to the Finance and Audit Review Committee, and we were able to work with the team very specifically about which scenario we thought would be the most realistic one to plan the future of the business on. And it wasn't the most pessimistic, it wasn't the most optimistic, really. We actually compromised on a few things, thinking thoroughly about the income, about the cost structures, and what costs we could affect and not affect, including everything from talking to our landlord, to other service providers to see what assistance they could give us. And we reset that and then decided we would call an unscheduled board meeting, because we thought it was critically important from a governance viewpoint that the board is fully informed about what the outlook might look like for the organisation. All of this having to be done virtually and successfully because of the IT infrastructure that we had set up. The board fully supported the revised forecast, and in fact, we agreed as a board in a very unusual way to completely reset our budget because the dramatic change and because of some of the new income flows were coming. So it comes again to Brenton, we were starting to receive some government grants which need to be classified in different ways in terms of the timing you receive them. And without understanding that, our budget and comparisons would have been chaotic and would have taken up 50% of the time of talking about financials at a board meeting. So we agreed to completely reset our budget and move forward from that basis, which was very helpful. So then the third factor we had to work out while we're doing all of this, what services can we continue to provide to our community, and how do we fulfill our strategy of helping our cohort live fearlessly and feel comfortable in this environment. And that's where we worked with Leanne very much. Again, she worked through what do we do and how do we do it, and also at the same time we're starting to receive government grants for our National Action Plan, which is critical for the forward look of our organisation. So with Leanne's leadership, she came back to the board again. How do we move more into a digital era, and how do we think about refocusing the resources of our organisation into supporting that strategy? And over that time, we also had to consider the fourth factor, which is how do we continue to meet our governance responsibility, including signing off our audit accounts and running an AGM. So they're the four big factors that the board had to consider. And with a tremendous CEO that we have and a terrific team, we've able to manage our way through that. We've got confidence of the future, and it's also been able to enlighten us quite significantly about how do we readjust our strategy for what we look at as an omni-channel presence going forward. So I'll hand back to you, Jodie.
Thank you, Bruce. That was such a comprehensive overview, and I'm so delighted to hear not just the swiftness, but the spirit of cooperation and respect of the expertise and the work of both the board and the subcommittee and your part-time CFO and CEO. So it sounds like there's been an amazing array of things achieved under difficult circumstances at this point in time. Thank you, Bruce. And I might invite Leanne to give her perspective as the CEO of the organisation. And Leanne, I know many of the people watching today on Reset 2020 are very small organisations. And I think Crohn's and Colitis Australia actually punches way above its weight in terms of its impact and benefits for the community, with a relatively small team of people and a large number of volunteers involved. Over to you.
Thank you, Jodie, and thank you for those kind words. I think, you know, Bruce gave an excellent summary of what sort of happened, but if I could just sort of talk about it from a different level. We did a lot of work last year in terms of our culture and our business processes, as well as the movement to a sort of a digital transformation. So what this whole situation has enabled us to do is to really test that culture and the values that we try and live every day. And because we operate in the health system, we are very evidence-based about what we do. We have a health system that tries to make decisions around, you know, the best available data and the best available evidence. So we use that in our organisation, and we use an acronym called FACTS, F-A-C-T-S, to describe our culture, which we designed as a part of our planning process. And that acronym stands for fast, agile, connected, transparent, and smart. And I have to say, through all of this, you know, every level of our small organisation, from the board, our volunteers, our staff, and all our supporters, this has really lived. You know, it's come to life. We've had to be fast. We've had to be agile. It's not business as usual. We are very open about our successes and failures, and we try to be smart and adopt the learnings that we've had. So it's been a really sort of wonderful process to be a part of, and I feel very privileged about that because we've got such a fantastic group that we're working with, and a passionate group. Very early on, we all agreed on a management strategy for this pandemic, and I think we started thinking about that when we had the bushfires, you know, that things were not going to be the same for us. Our donations were going to come down, and, you know, that support there philanthropic organisations have a different focus, and we'd really been working up a strategy to engage philanthropy as another revenue source. And, you know, that was sort of not happening for us at the moment with the issues that we want funded. We were finding barriers because everyone was focused on the catastrophes, and quite rightly so. You know, the bushfires and the pandemic has now, you know, taken over that. So we've had to adjust very quickly. What we decided very early on was to make sure that we were consistent, that we were purposeful, so connected to what our purpose is about, what we're meant to be doing as an organisation, and that we would all stay calm, you know, and step up. We also thought that protection of the health and well-being of our workforce was really important, you know, and we've doing things very differently to make sure that that's the case. And we wanted to exert and leverage our networks within the organisation. But we were also mindful that our members who are living with this serious chronic illness, Crohn's and colitis are inflammatory bowel diseases, as you mentioned, and people are often diagnosed at a very young age, and they live with this very nasty chronic illness that's an autoimmune disease. And, you know, it's very different from what a lot of people have in terms of irritable bowel syndrome, you know, with, you know, upset tummies and things. It's serious. The treatments involved in these diseases are very pervasive types of medications that impact on their immune status. So many people with IBD were self-isolating very quickly through this pandemic and wanted information about the risk to them. And so we were able to work with our partners in the medical community and make sure that we got that information out. We ramped up our comms to make sure that we were communicating more, developed visual content, developed a web page that had specific information. We approached organisations that we had connections with, such as Woolworths. So we got our reduced immunity people access to the shopping delivery system that they put in place. We also forged a partnership with Quilton toilet paper, because with all the toilet paper hoarding, that was a real problem for people with inflammatory bowel disease who need to go to the bathroom, you know, can be 15, 20 times a day. And when they're very ill, it can be a lot more. So the other key aspect was, of course, our financial sustainability. And I think Bruce has covered a lot of those key areas and the work that we did in that area, but it's still top of mind. It's, you know, as Brenton said, you know, understanding our cash position has become ever more important. Changing our budget, you know, we normally live with a yearly budget. We've already modified it already. That's going to happen, I think, as we live through this more frequently. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's a fantastic overview, Leanne, and I love how you started explaining really about the work that you did pre-COVID-19 on strengthening the culture of your organisation and facts. I wrote that down: fast, agile, connected and smart. A lot of organisations bandy this word pivoting or agile, and it's really actually doesn't mean a lot. But the example, the very practical case study that both you and Bruce have explained, it shows absolute agility in you know, all of the decisions that have been made and the swiftness, and in particular, really thinking deeply about the impacts of COVID on the community members that you're there to serve and support with living with Crohn's and colitis, and how you can play a role in supporting them in different and new ways. So I think it sounds like a lot of activities, but very thoughtful and focused activities. I'd like to just remind everybody that we've got opportunities for questions and answers if you'd like to just pop those in the box down below. And I'd like to also now sort of reintroduce Brenton into the conversation, and now we'll have a discussion with both Brenton, Leanne and Bruce. Brenton, you've been listening patiently to this great case study here. What are some of your thoughts about what you've heard Crohn's and colitis do?
Yeah, well, it feeds into the question. I think somebody had logged it there about kind of just how to diversify income and kind of how to change things up. And I think the organisations and the boards that have done it best and well, in my experience, are just the ones that have been very proactive about it and have, stepped very deliberately into that space. And certainly it's very interesting to hear from Leanne and Bruce about, their experience, and, they've certainly, very much been very proactive and, sought some advice and, considered different options, etc. And, I think that almost is kind of key. I think just, kind of taking the bull by the horns with it and really, stepping very, very deliberately into that space of, doing things differently.
Thank you. Might come back to Bruce. One of the things you mentioned was as well the importance of the board coming together and not spending all of their time focused just on finances. Your role as the chair is really pivotal in that. Could you just talk us through a little bit about how you managed or how you are currently managing your role as the chair in providing that leadership?
I think one of the interesting things is that we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're finding that the way we used to do things can't be done today. And we've seen how our cohort and the broad community have had to adapt to change. We see that in the broad community in everything from online shopping to we all work from home and use Zoom meetings, etc. So one of the things that was absolutely critically important is, as you've already pointed out and we've to indicate, is how do we maintain ongoing services to our community? They needed even more support now. So Leanne worked really hard with the team to ensure that we changed the format of our newsletters. We changed the regularity of the newsletters. We changed the content of the newsletters. We talked about the different cohorts we serve and how do we enable our support groups to use Zoom if they want to use Zoom. And from all of this, Jody, one of the conversations we had at our board meeting this week was the fact that previously we've been what I would call a tactile, physically engaged organisation, but now with the opportunity for us to build an omni-channel organisation, one that engages with our community both digitally and physically equally and creates wonderful customer or cohort experiences for them so they can get the support they need in any manner, now forms part of our ongoing strategy. And actually we've reflected on our board and said we need to improve our digital skills even further to ensure we can support that. So the implications of a terrible pandemic can actually be quite constructive if you think about how do you respond and how do you create greater opportunities for further engagement going forward.
Yes, and I guess that depends on your mindset, doesn't it? About not just your ability to think about things differently, but how you can make use of the opportunity in a way that's going to be actually delivering better value or pardon me, far more reaching services to people who might not have been able to access them previously. I'd love to hear a little bit more about this notion about budget reshaping, because how you're. And I say this collectively, in all of your various roles, you're in a difficult situation about some uncertainty of revenue and also ongoing costs and obligations. So, what do you cut? What do you keep? How do you make some of those big decisions very rapidly?
Quality input, it comes back to what Leanne talked about. Because we've got a strong medical base, we're very evidence-based in how we look at things.
Yeah.
And what's been quite remarkable about the organisation, again, which I actually did have an opportunity to talk to the board about, is, and over the last 5 or 6 months, Leanne has reshaped the organisation quite dramatically. And what we've done is prioritise resources in the way we want to allocate our services and the way our revenue has been moving as well. So we actually did lose a couple of employees. We didn't react to that very quickly. We asked somebody else to pick up some additional tasks. And then we thought about how do we support the other new revenue sources that are coming in to provide services, e.g., we've won some government grants. How do we project manage that successfully? How do we engage people differently? So how do we support our marketing team differently? And Leanne, as part of the CEO, her thinking was able to help reshape it. Now, I think one of the great things is, I think we could, Leanne, they say we have a great working relationship. We speak every week, at least once, if not more often, to try and see how we can support one another. And the team's ability to respond to that has helped us. Now, in terms of making decisions about what you don't do was as important as anything else, because we have a very ambitious CEO and a very ambitious team. And Leanne has had to make decisions about, we can't provide that service, we stop it and we save the money. And I think she's become ambitious in providing services in other ways, which we're all delighted about.
Yeah, that's great. What are your thoughts, Leanne?
Yeah, look, I think, we've been fortunate in that Bruce and I work very well together and do have a good relationship. And I think that's critical for the success of any business. And we do that through regular communications. And I think, we've both had the same approach in terms of managing risk and leveraging opportunity. That was a part of the message that we got out very early across the committee structures and across the staffing and volunteer networks, that this is a different time. This is not business as usual. And so everyone had to sort of, think about that. And Bruce, as the chair, has, he is very, very skilled at framing specific questions in certain ways that are not confronting, but enable people to think about things differently. And that's been so important at all levels of the organisation. And people have stepped up with that, and I think that's really helped us in recent times.
Yeah, I think the quality of questions that we all ask are incredibly important to help people think about things differently, and also have a more strategic and sort of considered idea on how things could be, as opposed to how they are or how we want them to be. Thank you, Leanne. I might ask you all to respond to this question. I'll start with Brenton. So I know that a lot of people who are here now for Reset 2020 are probably feeling a bit overwhelmed about how could they also manage this situation in their organisation about financial sustainability. Brenton, what would be some of your advice to people who maybe don't have such a great relationship between the board and the chair, and maybe don't even have in-house CFOs? So what sort of things could they be doing now?
Yeah, it's certainly challenging, particularly for smaller organisations that, may not, the finance team might just be, an outsourced bookkeeper, working a few hours a week or a month, and that's quite common. It's certainly even for that sort of organisation, though, I think the current situation that we're all in just requires a different response, really, on a number of different levels. And I think for each organisation, it's up to them really to form their own view in terms of their uncertainty going forward. So as I touched on earlier, some of the organisations that I'm working with at the moment actually have a lot of certainty going forward. Their grant funding is quite secure. Their other revenue streams may not be in risk. So for them, it's in some respects it's business as usual, but for others that are, operating in a much more uncertain context, and things like the regularity and accuracy of financial reports just become crucial. As I touched on earlier, perhaps some different approaches to their budgeting and forecasting. Again, feeding into that issue of, how certain are their revenue streams, etc. It is a time to be thinking about doing things differently, and not just the way they've always been done. Understanding, though, that can be challenging, of course, if you're a small organisation and you don't have a lot of resources. But you know, there may be a need just to get some additional help through this time, and kind of you know, just trying to work around that level of uncertainty and what the organisation might need to kind of help its pathway forward.
Yeah, I think you make some fantastic points there, Brenton. So I think just in summary, some of those gold nuggets there was also for people to make sure they're getting accurate and frequent financial reports. I think that's the takeaway, because the absence of that is absence of data. And coming back to Leanne and Bruce being very sort of data driven and factually based with their approach, then if you don't have that, you're sort of operating in a vacuum. So now might be the time to actually get somebody in to help tidy that up and make sure that's on top of it. And Leanne, what advice would you give to some smaller organisations who maybe don't have the same dynamic between the board and the chair, or the CEO and the board?
Yeah. I think, you know, every situation is different in every organisation because you've got people involved. We're all very different and we bring all different capabilities. I think one of the important things is thinking about who in your network can really help at this time and not being frightened to reach out and ask. So, for example, in the financial area, you know, Brenton talked about the importance of forecasting. And I know a lot of not-for-profits do not have forecasting in place. You know, they have no idea where they're actually going to be in terms of their end-of-year result, let alone any further than that. So I think, you know, if you are large enough to be an organisation that is audited, then you might want to reach out to your auditors to see if they can help you get, you know, some people in to assist in terms of, you know, changing your system so you're getting more frequent information. You know, those that are not working on getting their P&L and financial reports done end of month and all prepared, you know, might need to sort of reach out for some advice for that to happen. But I think asking the question, please, you know, people don't hesitate, because people, they're just wanting to help out there. And that's what I would encourage people to do.
I love that. That is such a fabulous reminder, because sometimes we think the limitation is the budget. I can't afford to get X, Y, and Z done. But what you're reminding us, Leanne, which is so important, is that who in my networks could help, and perhaps even it could be contacting your auditor to be able to get some suggestions of other people. That reminds me, actually, when I first started my journey in the non-profit world, I was the chair of an organisation, and I didn't really have didn't do any due diligence, and now when I think back, I was quite naive, but we were confronted with a range of very complex issues, and I really had to dig deep about who could help me even talk this through confidentially. And it was, you know, a neighbour of mine, actually, over a conversation over the fence, where she just really helped me understand things better. She listened without judgment and gave me the confidence to then say, I need to take action and move forward. So it can be just sort of random conversations that can really help you in difficult times. Thank you. And Bruce, what advice would you give to people who needing extra support at the moment?
Ask. I'm not a shy person, but there are resources, and I think one of the things is I would encourage every not-for-profit organisation to look at the structure of their board. If they don't have people who are competent in a finance area, if they can't find somebody, that leaves them vulnerable. And really building up the skills matrix for your board is essential. We've been working on that for the last couple of years. We'll continue, and we're continuing to work on it. It's an ongoing process. And that skill in particular, not just the COVID pandemic, but it's an ongoing skill that you need to have in the board. In the interim, I would agree with both Brenton and Leanne. You can't afford not to have this looked at. And even if you have to pay a little bit of money to get some help, I think it's absolutely essential to have the right financial reporting and analytical capability in your organisation.
Excellent. So ask and also think ahead in terms of the skills and composition of the board. And I guess, you know, for people here now on Reset 2020, we're going to come into AGM season, whether that's virtually or face-to-face, depending on time of year and social distancing. But there are lots of very practical ways that people can get very skilled directors. And, you know, if we want to look at the optimist side of things, there are a lot of people due to circumstances who might have additional time available. You know, they may not be fully employed because their hours are not available in their organisation, or sadly they might have lost their jobs. So there's no shortage of talent out there of people who I think would be willing and able to support and give some really good insights and guidance on financial sustainability at the moment. I welcome any other people who'd like to pop some questions in the Q&A box below. But before we go to that, we'd love to show the results of the poll. We'll do that in just a little minute. If Julia could share that with us in a tick. Yeah, here we go. Thank you. So we've got here 45% of people are saying we're uncertain about our future income streams. 15% we don't know how to diversify our revenue models. 50% are saying we're concerned about declining revenue and how to make tough decisions. And the next biggest one there, I'll just scroll down to, is we're feeling very anxious about the impacts on our staff, volunteers and clients. So thank you everybody for sharing that. I think that gives us some good insights actually to answer some of these questions. So for people who are, let's talk about this idea of future income streams and diversifying revenue. Now, I do a lot of strategic planning work, and often what happens is that in the workshop people say, you know what, we've got to have financial sustainability. I know, we've got to diversify income streams. And then they do a full stop. And that's sort of what happens. Nothing goes from there. So, Brenton, what are some very practical things that people could do? Now, you mentioned about donations and other things, but could you give us some examples of maybe some more commercial products or services that people have created? And this is a question to everybody: products and services that have generated revenue aligned with the purpose and the mission of the organisation. Do you want to go with that, Brenton?
Yeah, I think I got the question there. It was the internet connection was just dropping in and out a little bit.
That's okay.
But I think it was a question about revenue and diversifying. Is that
yes,
is that right?
That's correct. So some practical ways that people could generate more income, maybe some commercial ideas that you've come across.
Yeah, look, it's quite a big area, but it's again, it's one of these areas that, you know, the boards that have done it well have proactively stepped into this space. So firstly, just understanding what the current revenue mix is and where revenue streams are coming from. You can do some percentages around that. Then doing things like just, you know, considering what assets the organisation actually has, and that can be quite a useful exercise in and of itself. Sometimes you may not realise, you know, the full extent of your assets. And by assets, I mean things like, you know, the skill mix of the board and key people in the organisation. You might think of your database as a strong asset. Things that you can leverage off and perhaps open up some different income streams. Certainly things like social enterprise, you know, there's a lot of not-for-profit organisations getting into that space now. It's really kind of forming a view around, you know, the organisation as it is now, where you'd like to be kind of, you know, into the future, the risks around different, you know, sources of revenue, etc. And you know, taking some measured steps in a particular direction. So one organisation that I did some work with last year, the board did this sort of work and very deliberately decided to, you know, through their budgeting process, basically create what they called an investment year. So they recognised to move in some different directions from a revenue stream point of view, they needed to invest in bringing in some different skills within the organisation, so some fundraising expertise, or marketing expertise, or social enterprise expertise. And to do that, it's like turning a ship around. It takes a little bit of time. So again, but that all came out of being very proactive, the board wanting to change, setting some targets, etc., forming some views about what's realistic and what's not, in a very competitive kind of landscape as the not-for-profit world is, and then taking some measured steps in a particular direction. So
excellent. Thank you, Brenton. Over to you, Leanne. What are some ideas that you could share?
Yeah, well, when I think about this, I think, it's really important that you understand what your capabilities are, as Brenton's touched on, with your skills and all your other capabilities as an organisation. And then think about where you might be able to add value in terms of what you do, and what sort of things that you might think about doing that you can monetize, and that can take you on all different paths. If I can use an example that we had through this year, where we've never as an organisation put in for a contestable government grant. But there was one that we thought that we could be successful in achieving, but we had to do that through the development of a consortia. So we had to partner with other organisations because we knew that would strengthen our ability to get that. And we have never done that before. So, and we went through that process. We have been awarded the grant, and we're now got some really good work to do in the space of education and awareness of IBD.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, I think where you add value is really important to identify.
Fantastic, thank you. And Bruce, before we get to you, and we've got a question that's come in that says, and I'll just check that, about additional ways to generate revenue from training rooms. I think I can answer that now. I think probably training rooms are not going to be an area that you can generate revenue from the public or people, but you might like to consider ways it could be used for a unique space, like filming webinars and training that could be done virtually. That's my top tip right here and now. Bruce, what are your thoughts before we finish off on today's great session?
Look, very, very quickly, as Leanne pointed out, government grant, we won through a much longer process, but the decision to seek a new style of grant was led by Leanne, and her ability to bring together different parties was critical. She also has enormous passion and has brought to the board a passion about social enterprise. We've been in the process of developing started off in a one thought process, but over the time we've completely evolved it into a provision of capability development for a broader number of allied health professionals who can access skills and education to help our cohort. So we build a mutual benefit position, and just two examples of how our future income streams are developing. And we've also been looking at how do we improve our philanthropy, and part of that has been by appointing somebody into the board who's got a stronger experience in philanthropy, and building those skills through our organisation, which we actually had to put on hold at the point we wanted to make. That was a decision we made, coming back to one of your early points, Joe. We're not going to spend the money, we're going to have to do the work ourselves harder. And as a board, some of us have stepped up. We meet every 2 weeks to discuss that issue. So yeah, it's an ongoing process, and as you talked about, it's part of that agility. You just have to think about it. If you don't, today is not the old, and you've got to create the new.
That's a great way for us to finish up, Bruce. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to just give a heartfelt thanks to both Leanne, Bruce, and to Brenton for joining us today on Reset 2020. Your suggestions, your advice has been calm, helpful, and absolutely on point. And I know that I've got heaps out of what you've talked about and shared, and I know a lot of people in the audience today will as well. So thank you for joining us, and for the great work that you're doing. I'd like to just hand over now to Julia, who will talk to us now about the next show that's coming up.
Great, thank you, Jodie. Thanks, Leanne, Bruce and Brenton. It's been lovely sitting back here and listening in and taking some notes as well. It was lovely to hear about how over the last 12 months, the culture and values and the whole organisation transformation has been put through its test over the last couple of months. And I think that was really interesting, and also a great segue into what we will be talking about next, coming up on our live show in 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks' time, and we hope to go fortnightly to the end of the year, we'll know that over the next week or so, we will be having the Jane Goodall Institute Australia come on the show. They've had a very significant change in their organisation over the last 10 years. Formerly very reliant on Jane Goodall coming to Australia, and that being the big activity and big engagement and fundraising revenue stream of Jane coming. And they've had an amazing journey over the last 18 months of diversifying their income and looking at the whole change piece as an organisation based on, you know, being an international founder, and what does that mean for the organisation into the future. So they're going to be going behind the scenes and sharing some of that change that they've been through, but they're also going through a bit of rapid growth as well. And they're trying to balance rapid growth with this uncertain space. So what we're doing is bringing along 2 of our change management specialists from the collective, John Hunter and Joe Smythe. They're working on the session together at the moment for 2 weeks' time. We're going to be looking at rapid change, culture and growth, and having a conversation around that. So we'd love to see you there in 2 weeks' time, and please do let other people know about the show that's coming up. As you have seen today and experienced today with both Jodie as a governance specialist and Brenton here today as a finance specialist, we have a beautiful, wonderful community at the X Factor Collective of really, really talented specialists who not only know their work and know the business of being in the not-for-profit sector, but bring a lot of heart to their work and great people to work with. So you can come and connect with us anytime. We've built a platform where you can search for different areas of specialisation, but we've also got a lovely little service where you can actually have a conversation with us, and we can talk about different solutions that might be available within our growing network of specialist businesses in the collective. So we hope to be able to help you into the future, either through our programming here with Reset 2020 or being able to connect you in with other specialists as well. So that's our show for today. Thank you so much, Jodie, for your beautiful facilitation today. It's always a great pleasure and privilege to watch you facilitate conversations. Very, very good job. Thank you, Brenton, for sharing, and we'll make sure those slides are available. A few people have asked about that as well. Make sure those slides are available to you, as well as this recording that you might want to go back and watch at another time. Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Bruce, very much for taking us behind the scenes. It's a privilege to be able to hear from organisations at the moment who being able to share with us the different considerations and reflections. And it's a wonderful show. I say that as the founder, but I love what we're doing here, being able to help people just with little nuggets here and there to take into the change and the transformation that they're all going through. So a wonderful conversation, a great hour. Really hope you enjoyed it here, if you're here with us live today or watching the recording. And I'm going to say goodbye, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thanks, everybody.